Gary Striegler. Today I want to share with you one of the most important things that any carpenter does, and that's how to use a table saw safely. What I'm really going to share with you is just simply what I would share with you if you went to work for me, you didn't know how to use a table saw. I'm not going to say that this is all inclusive, everything you need to know about using a table saw, but I think this will give you a really good general information about it, and it's basically how I use a table saw every day. Now, the first thing that is important to me about a table saw is how the fence is set up. I'm going to pop this guard out. I want there to be just a tiny bit, maybe a 32nd of an inch more distance at the back of the fence to the tooth of the blade than the front. What that means is when I push it through, it's not binding up on the back side of the blade. If you're making rips, and a rip is a long cut with the grain, and you're seeing it make sawdust on the back side of the blade, that probably means that your fence is towed in a little bit, and that's binding, and that's really dangerous, because probably the most common thing that happens to anybody on a table saw is kickback or the board binding up. And that's when the back of the blade takes control and throws the board back. So if I can have this fence just maybe a 32nd of an inch thrown over, that's what I do all the time, and I've never found that to cause me to have problems with accuracy of cut, and it's much, much safer. One of the other things that's really important to me is the height of the blade. Generally, you need not more than a few teeth showing. Some people might want to have, a half an inch or whatever, but you don't need a whole lot more than just a few teeth showing on top of the blade. That's what really makes it safe. Now, also, whenever possible, well, and pretty much on every occasion, you want to use a push stick unless you can make the cut and have your finger be more than 3 inches away from the blade. So if I can make the cut and be 3 inches away from the blade, then I'm probably going to consider that safe enough not to use a push stick. We've got all sorts of push sticks that we make. It doesn't really matter as long as you have a pretty good push stick to push it through. Now, this is also really important. When you're pushing the board through, you've got to push it all the way past the back side of the blade. Because if you happen to, leave it there with a little bit of the wood, and the blade, it can still kick up or cause a problem. If you've ever been around when a board got on top of the blade and got launched, I've literally seen pieces of wood almost thrown through a garage door when there's just that much force. Now, it's also really important to actually use this guard. They've manufactured these table saws now with guards that are actually to where you can use them. I like this one because it comes in and out. Now, this piece back behind here is actually serves as a riving knife, and what that piece of metal does, it won't let the wood pinch back. Sometimes wood has built-in stress and it wants to pinch, but by having that back there, I won't say totally eliminates, but it really helps keep that board from pinching and getting on the back side of the blade and kicking back at me. Now, I think I said earlier, but ripping is when you're ripping with the grain of the wood, and most of the work that we still do is ripping, or maybe you would say it's ripping with the long direction of the piece of wood you're working with. Really important, this saw doesn't make straight edges. You need to start with a straight edge. There are some jigs you can make to create it, but that's not what this video is about. So you want to make sure that you're in good contact with the fence. By the way, you don't need to watch the blade. You watch the fence, and just always know where the blade is. At least that's what works for me. Now, I don't want to start. I'm going to exaggerate this, and I'm going to get over where you can see it. I want to keep that wood down flat. I don't want to start like this or like that. The wood needs to be flat, and it's really helpful. This outfeed table that we've just set up to this video isn't actually at the right height. It's a little bit low, but it's really, really helpful if you can have an outfeed table that's just slightly below the level of the table, so that when you push through, it's resting on something and you push it all the way through past the blade. But I would start and I'd be making that cut. I'm gonna move this up a little bit. And, you know, when I got to the point where I was close enough, I'd take this and push it through. Now, if you start trying to grab that push stick too soon, sometimes you can push down on it. Just make sure that you're keeping pressure down the table, push all the way through and past. Couple other things that I think are really important to using the saw safely is the blade that you're using. This is the kind of blade that I run almost all the time on my table saw. It's a 50-tooth combination blade, and this one's actually a Tenaroo. It's a really good blade, but there are other good blades made. And what it does a good job ripping, but it also does a pretty good job cross cutting. So I put one blade on the table saw and have to do both jobs, but you want a sharp blade. If the blade is dull and you're forcing, that's when you can get yourself hurt, when you have your hand slip or something. Now, there are some cuts that you just absolutely have to have the guard off. But when you do that, you want to make sure you have the height right, the blade height right, so it's not too high, and that you use a push stick. One of the things I like about this particular saw, it actually has this fence offset so that I can pop this side up and I can literally leave the guard on and make a 1/4 inch rip. That's a great feature to me. But there are times when you want to take this part of the guide off, and I don't even know how to do it on this saw, this part of the guard, but you would still leave that riving knife part. Now I think actually on this saw, there's probably one down here, there's actually just a riving knife. Here it is. So if I had to make a cut where I couldn't keep this guard on, I would put this riving knife in there, because that still protects me from getting pinched at the back side of the blade. Now, when you start ripping longer boards, another great rule is simply get somebody to help you. Now, the person who's helping is just there to catch and to support. The person who's in front of the saw is the person that does the guiding. And again, I want to keep pressure against the fence. I want to, in my mind, know where the blade is, but I really want to watch the fence, because the fence is what's guiding and the saw blade's doing the cutting. As long as I've got the guard on there, I really just don't need to worry about the blade. One other thing that sometimes people do, this is called a feather board, and it needs to be set up properly. The feather board sits in the slots of this table saw, the top, and it puts pressure against the board so that I don't have to work as hard, pushing over against the fence. But it has to be set up where it's pushing in front of the fence, not behind. If you were to set up back here pushing behind it, you'd actually be pinching that board. And again, that's going to cause you a lot of problems. Maybe the only other thing that I'd want to share is cross-cutting. Now, cross-cutting would be generally with a piece of plywood. So if I'm cross-cutting with a piece of plywood, I would usually use the fence. And if it was much bigger than a piece of plywood like this, I would want to get the help of a friend who is actually going to tail out here, support the wood, and as I make the push through. Again, it's really important that I'm the person that's in control of the cut, and I push it all the way past the blade before I stop. What I would probably tell you is, for the vast majority of the time, unless you're really experienced, you would want to just get something like a track saw or make a guide for your skill saw to cut the pieces more down to shape, and then you can do the cut to the final size on the table saw. But it's kind of dangerous to be cutting super big pieces on the table saw unless you're really experienced and the person that's helping you is really experienced. So just kind of some general things about the table saw. You want to buy a table saw that has sufficient power. Buy the best table saw that you possibly can, because It's a tool that you're going to use all the time, and if you buy the right one, it can last you for years or maybe even throughout your whole career. Try and think about capacity. How much does it rip? How much power does it have? And I like the ones that are on a stand as much as possible. So that's probably not everything that I know about a table saw, but it's a whole lot about how you can use a table saw, how I use a table saw every day. And these saws are amazing. They will do so much great work for you as long as you're really careful. I always want to finish up any video that I do by saying, when you're working with power tools, always be safe. Don't let yourself get lulled to sleep. And if you feel uncomfortable about something that you're getting ready to do, simply don't do it. One of the major things again is follow that 3-inch rule. Don't ever get your fingers within 3 inches of the blade. Use a push stick. One other quick thing. Some people, occasionally you will see trying to cross cut a board off the fence like this. That's really, really dangerous. If you're going to make a cross cut on a piece of lumber like this, you need to use the miter gauge. And truthfully, with today's miter saws and cross-cut miter saws, you just don't really need to make these kind of cuts on a table saw. And when you're trapping the piece of wood between the fence and the blade like this, and the distance here is greater than the width of the board, you're just asking for trouble. So that's kind of that final thing that I want to tell you not to do. And so hopefully that's enough stuff to get you comfortable working with a table saw. How much time was that?
That was about 11 minutes.
Okay, feel like I covered it pretty well?
Yeah, I wish I would have had that video when I was first learning how to use a table saw.
So you think that's good enough? I think it's good enough to send people. I mean,
Yeah.
I stumbled a couple times, but
No, it's
they could
good.
probably edit the